What is up, comic fans? I've got a very fun video planned for you today, and I was sitting around thinking, as a comic book reader, as a collector, this hobby really takes me down so many different avenues, down so many different rabbit holes, and most recently, something that's really been stuck in my mind and has piqued my interest has been none other than Charlton Comics. And I was wondering how many people out there really know about Charlton Comics, the history of them, the highs, the lows. So I wanted to take a brief moment today to do a little video and kind of look at some of that. What happened to them? What did they do? What did they accomplish? And most importantly, where are they now? Today's video is sponsored by Big Time Collectibles. Be sure to check them out at their website, bigtimecollectibles.com, and follow them on social media to never miss out on the amazing stuff they're doing. And if you need anything cleaned or pressed, hit up our friend Justin over on Instagram. Be sure to let him know you found him via the channel, or hit him with the promo code WeAreLegion and take advantage of the special offers that he has running. All right, so let's get into it. Charlton Comics, where are they now? So you probably are more familiar with this publisher than you think, at least in some capacity. So let's get into it. So initially, Charlton Comics was founded by two gentlemen under the name of TWO Charles Comics in 1940. So it's been around for a really long time. That's over 80 years worth of history. So needless to say, this video is going to be hitting on more bullet points than the deepest of dives. That's just too much to really tackle in a short form video like this is. But moving right along, after that first introduction, they published under TWO for 5 short years before changing the name of their publication to Charlton Comics in 1945. It stayed Charlton for just over 40 years until 1986. So under this one publication, they did more than just comics. They published regular books, puzzles, brieflies, magazines, and even sheet music. So they were kind of like a huge umbrella company to numerous types of publication in print form. And one thing that stood out for Charlton that none of the other publishers had, they were a one-size-fits-all. Like they just tackled it all. Every bit of it was under their own umbrella. They did editorial, publishing, distribution. They didn't have to go out of house for anything at all, which helped them tremendously with costs. They had their own presses and everything. And it was great that they were able to save that money because they are notoriously known for having some of the worst pay rates for their creators. They are known for poor quality paper. And it's even suggested to me that they even only got into comic books as a way to keep their presses running 24 hours a day, as it was cheaper to keep them running and keep them printing than it was to shut them down and start them up, which is why they got into comics. And you can kind of see that in the quality of their books, the paper quality, the way that the words are put on the paper. They did not use actual letters. They actually just used typeset. And all of that came into play later on to kind of hit their highs and their lows. And moving right into what they really did, they had all kinds of stuff. They had romances, horrors, sci-fi, and they even got into superheroes late in the game, but they did westerns, crime books. They pretty much were a jack of all trade. They were just throwing stuff at the wall to see what could stick. And it wasn't until the DC Renaissance of the Silver Age, where they just rejuvenated the comic book market to superheroes, that they got into superheroes heavily, with their first one really being Captain Atom in March of 1960. It was in Space Adventures anthology comic, and even the legendary Steve Ditko worked on the character. And Steve Ditko will not be the only name that you'll see later in this video, as a lot of people cut their teeth at Charlton Comics. And Captain Atom might have been their first, but he definitely wasn't their last. They had a really large assortment of superheroes that they kind of classified as their quote-unquote action heroes. And for this video's purposes, 6 of them are going to stand out more than the rest. And those 6 are none other than Peacemaker, Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, The Question, Thunderbolt, and Nightshade. Some of these might already start to look familiar to you as you've seen them under another publisher. Some of them might not be as familiar, but you might draw a comparison here shortly. And moving right through to the Bronze Age, we saw a lot of new tactics being done by Charlton Comics, because it was kind of a dip in the starting to get to a dip in their sales and stuff. So they brought in new talent. Some of the names like Mike Zeck, Joe Stanton returned to do some work for him. John Byrne, famously of the X-Men, he got in there and he even cut his teeth there. Bob Layton worked there. And they also started canceling some of their other romance titles and pretty much killed that whole line. But they did bring in some gothic romance books And they also got into painted covers, which were a big deal at the time, bringing in that cover artwork to be more flashy and draw more eyes and attention. And notably, Don Newton did a lot of work for them, who was one of those artists that died at a young age. And then most importantly, they leaned into the licensed properties, which are all your TV shows and cartoons at the time. They started doing books on the $6 Million Man, the Bionic Woman, Emergency, Space 1999, anything that they could find that has a built-in fan base that they could try to bring them over to that. I myself enjoy licensed property stuff. And then moving on to the end of an era, they started really seeing a decline in their comics in the 80s, as did a lot of publishers. Their presses and their equipment started to break down, and they did not have the money to rebuild these things. So they had to lean into what all good comic companies do when they're low on money: gimmicks. They started doing reprints. They started doing repackaging deals of old stories. And this is where you get this sub imprint called Modern Comics, where you see a lot of modern comic reprints of these characters, especially their first appearances, listed quite often for sale in places. So if you always want to look to see if you have a Charlton or a modern publisher imprint on the top left of those books, to know if you have the actual first appearance or a later reprint. And eventually it all just did not work out for them. They ended up doing a massive sell-off that really kicked off in 1983 specifically, but it kept going on. They sold a lot to their creators. They repackaged stuff and put it under a different publishing name, but they sold their entire action hero line off to none other than DC Comics. So DC Comics acquired their biggest, in my opinion, their biggest and most interesting characters, and they were able now to do with them whatever they wish. And it wasn't long before fans would see these characters again, because in 1985, DC brought them over into mainstream continuity when they destroyed their entire multiverse and rebuilt it in Crisis on Infinite Earths. That very first issue saw Blue Beetle from Charlton Comics get brought over into DC Comics. He even made the front cover of that issue 1 with Ted Kord. Now, they did not get the rights to Dan Garrett, the original Blue Beetle, but this is Ted Kord Blue Beetle. And then in Crisis on Infinite Earths issue number 6, we saw the rest of the characters get brought over: Peacemaker, Captain Atom, Nightshade, Thunderbolt, The Question, and even Judo Master, who most recently appeared in a live-action adaptation of Peacemaker on HBO Max. Now, they had big things planned for these characters, and no one had bigger plans for them than the legendary writer Alan Moore. And this is really where the story gets most interesting to me. This is what really draws me to the Charlton characters, is knowing this. So Alan Moore, most famously known for writing things like his Swamp Thing run, his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and Watchmen. This right here is probably one of the most influential and important comic books ever written, especially at DC, easily. And what Alan Moore wanted to do was take the Charlton characters and write a 12-issue maxi series with them. And DC gave him the okay, go ahead and do it. And then he showed them what he had planned, Watchmen. And DC's response was, hell no, not happening. This story is way too heavy, way too intense, and really just kind of just capsizes the whole idea of these characters being superheroes. And they had plans with these characters. They planned on using them in comic books for the fans to read. And if they were to use them in this, it would just blow people's perception of them. So Alan Moore said, I will not accept defeat. I'll make my own superheroes. And they said, sure, Alan, go for it. So he did. Or did he? Because what he did was he just retooled the Charlton characters, redesigned them with his artist Dave Gibbons, and he brought us Charlton characters all the same. So Thunderbolt was redrawn and named Ozymandias. Captain Atom is Dr. Manhattan. Blue Beetle is none other than Night Owl. Even both having, Blue Beetle has the Beetle car and Night Owl has Archie, the Owl car, and they almost look the same, even though they're completely different creatures. Nightshade was the Silk Spectre. The Question is obviously Rorschach. Same everything except for the ink blots on the mask. And then Peacemaker is none other than the Comedian, which seems so obvious once you know it. So if you've ever seen Watchmen, if you ever read the book, you have experience with these characters. You might just not have known it. So if you wonder where they are today, from the 80s to now, these characters have been in publication at DC, sometimes more popular than others. But you can go back and check the catalog and find countless amazing stories of all of them all throughout. From Peacemaker's miniseries to Captain Atom Armageddon is a great suggestion, where they actually use a character that didn't even start at DC to usher in other characters from the Wildstorm universe into the DC fold. Blue Beetle has had legendary run after legendary run, even becoming a legacy character himself and getting a Jaime Reyes film later this summer. And the Question, of course, Vic Sage is fantastic. Another person with legacy characters, with Renee Montoya becoming the Question after him, who is most recently in this DC Comics Lazarus Planet event. So these characters have not gone anywhere. Now, if you want to know a suggestion from me, be sure to check out Pax Americana from Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. This is almost like they retooled and wanted to redo Watchmen, but with the Charlton characters this time. You can see how Captain Atom even has the Dr. Manhattan Blue vibe to him. This was pretty much just a one-shot, and they just kind of go back and tell their version of it. It has all the imagery, all the symbolism, all the creative panel layouts that we saw in Watchmen, but done with the Charlton characters proper. I highly suggest checking that out. So that's pretty much what happened to him from inception to now. You can even go check out your local comic stores, which I always suggest, because a brand new Peacemaker title just got announced this past February 16th. So these characters are going nowhere no time soon, and there's plenty of great stories to learn about them and what's going to happen to them in the future. So that's going to do it for this video. Leave me a comment down below. Have you ever checked out these Charlton characters? Did you know the history of them? I know that Watchmen thing is such a great comic lore to be told. I just wanted to share that. And be sure to check out my other videos. I've been posting more of these kind of touching on history videos. I'm enjoying making them. They do take a lot of time. So be sure to check out the Supergirl one from last week. Very confusing history with her. It was fun to dive into. And don't forget to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and consider joining the channel membership. And a big thank you and shout out to all the channel members.